Hello and welcome to the Cloud Design Box podcast. With me today is Jonathan Bishop, who is the CEO of Cornerstone Academy Trust. Hi, Jonathan.
Hi, Darren. Good to be with you.
Yeah, and today we're going to be looking at the different ways of getting value for money from using Microsoft 365 for education. Jonathan, before we get into the details of that, could you tell us a little bit about the Cornerstone Academy Trust? And how you started using Microsoft 365.
Yeah, great. So Cornerstone is based in the southwest, just on the edge of Exeter, but actually with a school in North Devon over an hour away. We're just a small academy trust on a slow burn journey of growth. So we began at Broadcliffe Community Primary School, where I'm sat now. I'm in the office built in 1810. It's actually the bedroom of the head teacher. And so we converted it to an academy in 2010, so real early adopters. But in terms of that MAC growth, an interesting journey, because we have bid for and opened a brand new free school on the edge of Exeter. Then we repeated that. So we've just opened Monkerton Primary School right in Exeter. So we've got 3 schools within 10 minutes. And then this school that we sponsored, it went into special measures over an hour away. And we've really running the Academy Trust, as it were, one school, 4 campuses. And we're using the technology to bring the schools together to work in that way. So we've gag pooled, we pooled our money, we buy everything as though we were one school, everything centrally, but it's not a central head office, it's just one school. And additionally to that, we've been heavily involved in a number of Department for Education programs, working with schools regionally and nationally on a number of projects. Most recently, we've just been designated a behaviour hub, but in the last couple of years, we've been working on the EdTech demonstrator program, working with schools and trusts across the country in deploying networks, setting up their learning platform, and working virtually through the COVID pandemic, but now really getting that strategy for education, that strategy for EdTech, the deployment of devices, how to get post-COVID the best out of the investment in the classroom. All 4 schools are Microsoft Showcase schools, so we've had a long affiliation with Microsoft. We're an English hub. We run the Science Learning Partnership. So we've got this big outreach working collaboratively in partnership with schools regionally and locally and nationally on the school improvement projects. So how did we begin with Microsoft 365? Well, we've been playing around with one-to-one devices for students, began with year 6 here at Broadcliffe, extended it. We now are in a position where every child has a device from reception to year 6 in every school. So we've got thousands of devices, and that move of putting all of our infrastructure into the cloud began, I struggle to say, 5, 6, 7 years ago. And we have had a clear strategy of going serverless, this one-to-one device program with a cloud-based learning platform, which creates that flexibility in the workforce, those new strategies for teaching and learning built around blended learning, where we're utilizing the power of Microsoft 365 on the desktop in the hands of the child with a tablet in their classroom.
So how have you got value for money from using the cloud and the infrastructure you have? Because of course it's not just being in the cloud, you've also invested locally in certain infrastructures.
Yes, so I think value for money is a big buzzword. There's a VMFI tool from the DFE, and we're all trying to analyze, are we getting value for money, and is it having impact? Is it a curriculum focused budget? Is it having impact on children's learning? So the first thing I want to say is, in writing any strategy around EdTech and starting to look at value for money, you've really got to look at best value. Is our investment over a period of time going to really have the desired outcomes and the impact that we wanted it to have. The danger is otherwise, you might buy something cheaper. It doesn't do the job that you want it to do. It doesn't change outcomes for children. And actually, it was cheaper, but it was less impactful. Is that value for money? Of course it's not, is it? So I think the first, as it were, red herring in this one, or the white elephant in the room, is IT equipment's really expensive. Therefore, we can't really afford it. So if we can find a cheaper product and do it in a smaller scale, that would get better value. But it's not best value. It's not necessarily having the impact. So our strategy of going for one-to-one devices has been, first of all, to look at, you're right, that infrastructure internally. And that move away from flood wiring and power ports everywhere. And actually, that was only 5-6 years ago that probably you were needing to do that to get the speed and the reliability into a long battery life tablet in the hands of the child. It's really important you get the right infrastructure in your school. So you could spend lots of money on devices and get utterly frustrated staff and children because it doesn't work. So building not just your Wi-Fi infrastructure, but where you want it to be hardwired. So we've got a television studio. Within that television studio, we're able to create rich media content for the curriculum, to do staff CPD, to bring our schools together for assemblies, to be able to run conferences for our hubs using the virtual platforms to stream the content out. If you want to do that, you need high-end machines hardwired with good broadband. But a child that's in a classroom, which is going to a breakout room, accessing resources built in Microsoft 365 OneNote, actually, you want mobility, you want long battery life, you're looking for something different. So the device selection is really important. And that will dictate the infrastructure and where you put that infrastructure. So the investment in the right technology at the right place, really key. Now, I've talked about broadband in there. Fundamentally, the success of this is you need good broadband speeds. Yeah. And so we invest and make it a core fundamental investment to get the value in quality broadband. And then it means our schools are brought together as one network. So it's one thing putting things in the cloud that you can access, but when you're looking at device management, we're using a product called Intune. It means that out of the box, when we buy a device, a user can log in using their email address, and all of the deployment of the software and the policies and the settings that we want are out of the box. So we're not just talking about putting some files in OneDrive. We're actually talking about creating a cloud-based infrastructure that enables me to go from school to school, office to office, classroom to classroom, actually work remotely, and I get the same experience and the same management and deployment of the devices wherever I am for whoever. So without, again, being super techie on this, I don't know who's watching us today, but when you start looking at value for money, if you've got to employ a team of people to put an older version of the operating system onto older devices in a much more local deployment setting, that classic, we spent the whole summer holidays deploying all of our devices, investment in people has moved now to, I open the box of a brand new device and log in with my email, and all of that is done for me. It's a light touch device management. So come back to the point now of best value. The best value is if I can put a modern device in the hands of a student and into the hands of a teacher, with the right infrastructure that is managed via the cloud, and it works, I'm going to get, first of all, better quality teaching and learning utilizing that device in the classroom. Secondly, I'm going to be making savings in people's time, in how I deploy people effectively to manage that, and the number of people. I don't need as many people in all of the schools managing these networks because it's cloud-based. It's giving a resilience. I replenish every device every 3 years. So having a sustainable replenishment program is going to bring efficiencies in those devices. It's going to cut power consumption. You're going to get the latest devices. You're going to see energy savings in your bill. We've already talked about staff savings. Then, with one-to-one devices and digital inking, we're not printing to the same degree. Now, let's be clear. You're never going to get best value by saying, I'll buy a really expensive tablet and we won't print. That you're mapping off too simplistically some basic costs. You've got to see the cost of ownership over that 3 to 6 year period of a replenishment program against your strategy. And so you say, what's the right device to bring those efficiencies? And you look at the ownership from energy consumption, server investment, IT infrastructure within your schools, device procurement, people time and management, and you look at all of that cost, and then you say, what are the educational outcomes I'm wanting to achieve? If that cost gets the outcomes educationally we want to achieve, you can start to say, have I got best value?
Yeah.
Does that make sense, Darren?
It does, yeah. Is it worth it? That's the fundamental question. By making these changes, in terms of the improvements you see in teaching and learning and reducing frustration for teachers and students and creating creativity and all those things, is it worth it?
We're in the business of education and I'm a teacher. And whilst I might oversee these 4 schools in this role, I want to get, as we all do, the very best for children, the very best experiences, opportunities and outcomes for children. So when we're looking at an EdTech strategy, we're looking at putting the latest devices into the hands of the best trained, best qualified, most capable teachers. If I can create a learning environment in the physical classroom and in the virtual classroom and bring those two together, we're going to see great benefits education. Let me give you a practical example of how that works. Currently, we are delivering certain specialist teaching sessions, computer coding, modern foreign languages. We're primary schools. If I have to go and teach modern foreign languages, the teachers are not going to get best value. They're not going to get great quality. The outcomes are going to be pretty poor. I'm employing specialists. But what we're able to do now, using the lessons learned from lockdown, harnessing a blended learning approach, using Microsoft 365 and Teams as our learning platform, I'm bringing computer coding teachers into the classrooms virtually. And we've bought an investment here of a headset. You might say, a headset? Do you know, if you're going to buy every child a noise cancelling, wireless, a noise reduction headset with a boom mic, it means I can have a class of children on a call. So here we are, look, they're in a physical classroom, a group of children with a teacher. We're streaming into that classroom a specialist. They've joined, as it were, a virtual lesson from within a physical lesson. So they're at school, in the classroom, joining. But that means we can now bring in 2 or 3 specialists, and across our schools, we might have it cross age, year 5 and 6, we might have 240, 50 children in a lesson. We might have 3 specialists targeting 3 different levels matched to the child's place in their progress, their knowledge, their understanding. And in the classroom, they can put their hand up and say, can you come and help me? And an adult walks over. What you've got there is that value for money? I've had to invest in a tablet. I've had to invest in the headset. I've invested in the digital pen. I've bought, dare I say it, more expensive equipment. But it enables us to work in new ways, more flexible ways. I've got a class of 240 children, and they're getting better quality education than if I went in and taught 30 children, me and those 30 children.
It's a very different way of looking at the curriculum, isn't it? Because we're used to, one teacher, maybe a learning support assistant or a TA, and roughly 30 kids. That's kind of how the maths normally works out. But as you say, those people aren't necessarily specialists. I think, when I trained as a teacher, it was a secondary school teacher. I was a language teacher. And when I looked at the primary school teachers and who are training, I thought, that looks really hard. You've got to know everything. There's science, there's music, you have to do language. That's really hard. So to have somebody who is a music specialist and not just somebody who kind of, I can do music if I need to, but somebody who really is passionate about music. Perhaps they used to be in a band and now they're teaching. They might have had some records out in the 80s and now they're teaching, that sort of thing. Same for art teachers. And
this is transformational, in my view, in the way that you can start to operate and deliver your curriculum. It's not about everything is IT. You can go to an art room and paint an art picture, but you can capture that, go back to your physical classroom and have it. You could have a class, a lecture. You may not call them lectures at primary level, but you could have 60 children with a keynote speaker. You might not call them keynote speakers. Let me give you an example. I've had this year Michael Morpurgo, a world famous author, come in, and he stood in front of children and spoken to children. But we brought into that lesson others. He came physically, but we streamed him out virtually. We've recorded that. He may inspire them to do that work, and then they go into a writing workshop. And the board notes that the teacher has put there for them, they could go into a breakout room for support, and all of the resources and all of the work is there with them. It creates a flexible working approach to the delivery of the curriculum. So when you then say, well, could we have done that cheaper? Well, you probably couldn't have delivered those outcomes cheaper. Yeah. Could we have bought IT devices cheaper? Possibly. A classic is an interactive whiteboard on the wall. I have no issue with them. They're great. They're quite a costly investment. If you don't get the staff training right, they just become a glorified whiteboard on the wall. It's not best value. You need to get the training of the staff to utilize the whiteboard. Now, I've not bought any, nothing against them, because I said, actually, we're going to put that investment into the laptop with digital inking. And so they ink onto a tablet in their hand. And the subtle difference is this, Darren. I'm looking at you down a webcam and talking to you, and you're looking at me. If I was a teacher now, streaming that out to you with my class behind me, I've got to turn my back to you now to write on the wall. Now, teachers have done that for centuries.
Yeah, it's that, right?
Actually, it's not natural. If I'm talking to you, I'm looking at you down the camera. If I say, I have a look at this, I share my screen. So at the start of lockdown, people suddenly said, we need to give laptops to teachers. So they bought a laptop with a webcam. You can't digital ink. They then couldn't teach remotely as you would in a classroom. So what you've got to say is, what's my strategy? What are the educational outcomes? And once you've constructed that, you procure the right device for the right tool for the right lesson. And that way you can then start to get best value. And in the same way, we haven't talked about it, you then start to say, on my mantra of, I've got 4 schools, just a small map, but one school with 4 campuses, you start to be able to say, how do I bring a similar conversation to the efficiencies of running the multi-academy trust? And the multi-academies trusts that top slice into a head office that's centralized and have a replication of an old model that says a fairly autonomous school that has all of the staff and all of the infrastructure that a standalone school always had under local management, gets no efficiencies. Once you start to look at technology, you could have leadership team meetings cross-site in a Teams meeting. We've been doing that, but with conference facilities. Behind me is in my office, you'll see a large screen and it's got a camera. It's a room-based conference system in Teams. We brought our telephone system. You ring our Academy Trust, it will get answered by any administrator anywhere. They can be at home answering the phone. They could be in a school an hour away. They answer the phone and they put it through. Really small, not difficult to achieve, but we've brought the efficiency into Microsoft 365, underpinning the way we work as a MAT and the way we operate within the classroom for teaching and learning.
Yeah, and that's very clear for your kind of structure there with the 4 schools within a MAT, and of course they're primaries. But I can see that working very well in the secondary context as well. Let's say you're talking language teachers and they all want to get together, science teachers all want to get together, share resources, have meetings with each other, collaborate and argue in various sort of staff department teams. It does allow you to work together in a way that you just couldn't do before without jumping in the car and spending time driving to meetings.
And that cost, actually, you could say the cost of petrol.
Yeah,
actually, it's the cost of time. And whilst we might jump on a phone and make some phone calls, the actual efficiencies of working smartly, best value gets best outcomes. Best value is not necessarily the cheapest, and I hope our conversation has been labouring that point and proving the point. Get the right tools with the right resilience, with the right replenishment programming, it just works. It's a tool to do the job rather than the be all and end all. And I think too many people get caught in, we have no money, we can't achieve this. Therefore, we're not going to do it. You've got to think differently to make this investment. We don't think differently when it comes to heating. We say it's a core service. You have to heat your schools. The bills are going up. We've got to find a way to manage those bills and fund them. You don't say that actually with pens and pencils and rulers. We have the odd crisis occasionally, but you go, the children need those resources or they can't learn. And in my view, that concept that an efficient and effective IT infrastructure with devices in the hands, the right device in the right hands of students and teachers, and to bring those MAC-wide efficiencies isn't an option. If you don't do that, you're not going to get the possibilities of better outcomes. You're not getting best value. Your investment in IT, whilst cheaper, is less effective and can't be classed as value for money.
So drilling down on that investment and focusing on the student devices, because you've rolled out one-to-one student devices, which is it's a big undertaking. It's a big commitment. You've spoken a little bit about the reasons for doing that in terms of students being able to always access content and share. But how have you managed to do that, to fund that? Because I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, well, that's all right, but that's a lot of money. It's a lot of money to get students those devices. How have you put that together?
So it's a complex journey. So first of all, it's taken us a while to achieve. So we didn't go out and buy 1,500 devices overnight because it was a good idea. Clearly, we invested, saw the impact, looked at the change management with staff, invested in staff, and we've deployed that over many years. So first of all, clear strategy. Secondly, we've said, well, if I want a replenishment program, the most cost-effective way to do that is have, let's say you were going to buy 100 devices, and each device was £1,000. Big investment if that was the case. What you might say is, I buy £100,000 worth of kit up front, and every year you put aside, let's say, £35,000, and when you get to the end of it, you have got a little bit more than £100,000 because costs are going to go up, and then you buy again. The trouble is, to put aside in a savings plan 35,000 every year, people go, well, that's really expensive. How can I afford that? You then have to start equating that to your staffing bill. Your staffing bill is 80% of your budget. So it's not that the device is going to replace the staff, but you've got to say, if we're going to look at changing the way staff work, we're looking for them to work smartly, more efficiently, so that cutting teacher workload. So we might be saying, look, let's do some digital assessments within the classroom. I'm no longer needing to take teachers out of classroom to mark exam papers, because we're doing them with the children on the device that I bought them. So you start to say, where am I getting the efficiencies in the way I work? And then the reality is, you won't need as many staff. So you've got to start looking at that staffing bill. I've already talked about the cost of the purchase, deployment and management of your server infrastructure and the device management. If you can move that to serverless in the cloud, it's not suddenly you've saved all of that money, but there is a cost benefit in people's time, and you will start to find efficiencies. So you're looking for new ways of working that drive efficiencies in order to be able to fund that 35,000. Now, the reality is, I didn't have 35,000, so I borrowed the money. Now, when I say borrowed the money, it's a lease. It's an operating lease. So there's residual value at the end of it. You're not allowed a loan, but we are allowed an operating lease. And that means we're able to get a new device every 3 years. So I now have a sustainable replenishment program that's built into the budget, where I have created those savings. When you start to equate the cost of ownership in terms of every 3 years you replace it, if you could buy a student device now for £500, let's say 600, makes the numbers nice and easy, £200 a year. Now, you know, and I know that depending whether it's key stage 1, 2, 3, 4, you get funded slightly differently. But let's just, and they're still going towards a national funding formula, but let's just pluck a figure of £4,000 per pupil. You might get more, you might get slightly less, £4,000. We're saying spend £200 on a device per pupil out there, 4,000. If that becomes a real vehicle for managing their teaching and learning, as I've been describing, having all of the work in like a digital textbook, all of the assignments given to them, their planner, their schedule, the way to submit the work back to the teacher, the way to get help, the way to access lessons on catch up, the resources in advance so that you're prepared for the lesson, flipping the learning. If it becomes, in my rucksack, I've got a pen, a pencil, a ruler, and a surface, that cost at £600 a device per student, in my view, represents really good value for money. And you can start to build programs. What we're saying to people, what people are saying effectively, I'm getting £4,000 a pupil, and I have not invested in IT in a strategy for some schools for over 10 years. And now they're saying I can't afford it. Actually, I don't believe that's a good enough answer. What you've got to do is start remodeling your strategy that says we can't not afford it. We are denying the opportunities to children if we don't invest in this way.
Yeah, it is a literacy, isn't it? ICT. It's not. I remember when I first trained to be a teacher, it was kind of like, oh, and obviously you do all your marking, don't worry about that. But you might want to take him into the computer room, once every 6 months or something. It's not enough. People need these skills, and we also know that students, when the teaching's done right, respond better when they're given the kind of the rich media, or being able to do things on their device, and with all the spell checkers and the grammar checkers and the immersive readers, everything that comes with it.
I think you're right. It's a core skill, isn't it? Fundamentally, we're an English hub. You can't argue with the fact, if you can't read, you are scuppered for life.
Yeah.
A core fundamental skill. And I often say the blindingly obvious to people. You invite to World Book Day to inspire children to read, not readers, you invite authors. You can't access the wider curriculum and be successful without being a reader and a writer. And in the same vein as you said, those digital literacy skills, those skills of developing their language and their oracy to be successful in this modern world, this post-COVID world, we are giving them life skills that will not only enable them to access that wider curriculum opportunity, but it is the ways of working that they are going to have to work in for their futures. I come back to it. It's a cost you can't afford not to spend, rather than a cost you can't afford. It's not about cheapest. It's not about getting value because I've driven down that price. Of course, you need to do that, but it's about the best value, getting the right tool to deliver the right education for today, for the children today.
Brilliant.
It could be one last provocative point to you. Yeah, I throw this out there for your listeners. Yeah, and it's not a popular one. Every now and again they publish, and it's interesting that post-COVID, where people didn't spend as much money because we were all working remotely, the funds that are sat in multi-academy trusts and academies bank accounts, the reserve funds. And we're encouraged, quite rightly, as independent organisations, to have a reserves policy that is published in our accounts. But I don't want to put a figure on it, but it's many millions, if not billions, sat in bank accounts. And we've got children today that would benefit from these resources. I'm not in any way suggesting go blow it all, but on the subject of value for money, is it value for money to deny the children today the opportunities they could have that would transform their lives because we're worried about the issues of tomorrow? Of course, I'm not saying blow all of your reserves, but what I am saying is think wisely about the level of reserve and the needed investment today to make a difference to children that have suffered through COVID in the past 2 years.
Yeah, and of course there's the so-called digital divide as well. We know there are some students, some families who are really struggling, and if they didn't have, for example, those surfaces, they wouldn't have a device at home. They might have a phone, pay as you go, with a limited data amount on there, and that's the experience for that family. They're not necessarily going to have laptops and tablets and all the rest of it, and that would make a massive difference to them, obviously during the lockdown, but actually just after school any day of the week, and at the weekend when you're asking them to go off and learn. Not having that device is going to be a big inhibitor for those students, surely.
Absolutely, and I think that digital divide has a big connection with deprivation and those that are less able. But it's not only that. You can have a digital divide that is not linked in any way to wealth and income. You could go to one school down the road and to another school and get a digital divide. You could go to a classroom that has no access to the internet or a digital device at all. there's digital divides everywhere. So these are fundamental questions that say, is that right? Am I saying every lesson should be digital? Of course not. I'm saying you need a broad and balanced curriculum with the right tools in the right classroom infrastructure to be able to deliver the best quality. And that absolutely, in my view, is about giving access to digital devices and that online curriculum blended with that traditional go to a library, borrow a real library book and get lost in reading a book.
Yeah.
You need both. It's not either or. It's not a polarization of views. You need both in this modern world.
We've spoken before about this, haven't we? The kind of, handwriting and should you still be writing in books as well as digital? And I think we'll probably have to come back to that because that'll be a long conversation. But hopefully I can invite you back to have that and to compare and contrast and see what that blend looks like. Brilliant. Thanks today for your time, Jonathan, and for all the intuition that you've given us, the insight into how it really works inside a mat and how you genuinely can, in the real world, make these transformations. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Darren. Nice to talk to you.